With the Catalyst League, the RuneScape 3 version of League is reaching its midpoint, now it's a good time to finally talk about it, talk about the problems, the successes, and my thoughts on it all. Sort of. I don't really want to highlight my experience with the game mode. Instead, I want to take things a little bit differently. I want to use this video both as a video to sure talk about the positives and the negatives of leagues, but also to look at it as a microcosm of the main game. The Gathering Relic is one of the most important choices in any league. It's usually related to how you're going to tackle the rest of the relics and your objective in the game. Normally they are all balanced around foundational gathering skills such as mining, fishing or woodcutting. In these leagues we have three possible relics: Excavator, which is comprised of mining, smithing and archaeology; Divine Woodcutter, which is comprised of woodcutting, firemaking and divination; and Animal Wrangler, which is comprised of fishing, cooking and hunter. These are all tied thematically. Excavator is where you excavate things, and then you have the counterpart of production with smithing. Animal Wrangler has, to do with animals, and then you have the counterpart of cooking. And woodcutting you have, I guess woodcutting is a little bit special on that regard. This relic tier is all about using your gathering skills to automatically receive their production counterparts, while also being able to have them sent to the bank. So in case of Animal Wrangler, for example, when you fish something it automatically gets cooked and sent to the bank. That's the gist of the relic, although it does have some other perks to it. I do quite like a lot of what ties them, foundationally speaking. Essentially you have a bunch of gathering relics that are tied together from a thematic perspective, and then they are tied together to their productive counterpart, and added a third one on top of it all. I do actually wish that Animal Wrangler adds summoning as a third skill instead of enter, simply, to actually even tie the relics even more together, because then you would have the two skills that would been in the game for ages, and then each relic would have a skill that just don't exist. So essentially, old school RuneScape doesn't have summoning, divination and archaeology, so here you would have all of those skills available within a relic, but still. I also enjoy the toggling menu they actually add in case you wanted stuff to, that usually gets sent to the bank or automatically converted. Honestly, that's a nice touch, and it did show that the devs actually did pay attention to the details of the league. Overall, this has a great degree of familiarity with the old school RuneScape game mode, where that, first tier isn't super overpowered outside of the skills it affects, and they are very balanced. Unfortunately here, they very much are not. You see, while yes, in theory they are balanced, in practice we run into a couple of issues. Because RuneScape 3 has more skills than old school RuneScape, these gathering relics again affect 3 skills rather than usually they just 2. This would be fine if it weren't for a little big problem. RuneScape 3 is a little bit old. The reason why that is an issue is that, well, while in theory the relics are all balanced, in reality, due to how the game is updated, one ended up being way more overpowered than the rest. Excavator. Why is this relic more overpowered than the rest? 6 years ago we got the mining and smithing rework. These not only streamlined both skills to make them more enjoyable, inevitably said reworks also increased the value they add in the game when compared to woodcutting or fishing, which have been the same since the old school days. On top of that, the third skill also really doesn't help its case. Animal Wrangler, the fishing and cooking relic, has Enter, a skill that is so old it's in old school RuneScape. Divine Woodcutter might have Divination, a skill released in 2013, which is more modern. Unfortunately, Divination is kind of a mediocre skill and it's only really used on a handful of things. Compare that with Archaeology, which has been released in 2019 and is one of the most complete and useful skills in the game. Yeah, so in one relic you have 3 skills that are essentially 6 years old, while between the other 2, the newest skill you have is almost as old school RuneScape. But why is this even an issue? I mean, skills being old don't make them inherently bad, and why are newer skills more useful than old ones anyway? That is where the little final piece of the puzzle actually comes in. RuneScape 3 updates tend to focus on the best new thing. What do I mean by this? Let me actually take a little bit of a detour to Valarmor to make a little bit more sense. While many activities actually would illustrate my point when it comes to old school RuneScape, I want to focus on a specific one that I love for honestly no particular reason. Val totems. I love the idea of them because it actually showcases a trend with old school RuneScape skilling updates where they actually make the overworld the place where you actually train the skill rather than just being secluded in an instanced area somewhere. However, that's not what I'm bringing them up. What is relevant to us is that they are not the best XP, nor do they have the best rewards in the game, especially when it comes to GP. So why is all of this relevant? Well, totems actually came out just a few months ago, and they are not the best training method because they don't need to be. Their objective and the way they fit into the game is not to increase the XP you get from fletching, but rather to give players yet another choice when it comes to training the skill. This is the focus a lot of training methods actually have when it comes to old school RuneScape. In RuneScape 3, however, while we still have methods that will fit that criteria, most skilling updates will fall into a different one. New updates are simply new content, and if you want people to engage with new content, you gotta make it worthwhile, meaning newest content will have the shiniest rewards. Old school RuneScape can put updates in a game that are simply fun and unconcerned with amazing OP rewards because that's the culture that it cultivated over the years. In the same update, the giant crab came into the game. Yet again, this is not the best XP or GP per hour, but since the culture is that the updates exist to give players choice, the players also know that that's the point of the update and will react accordingly. In RuneScape 3, however, the present culture is one where you simply consume new content as new content, so if new content isn't worth doing, then it's dead content, and the devs don't want to release that content. This is because most RuneScape 3 players have completed most things in the game, so inherently they will want to do the new content, so the new content needs to be worth doing, aka being more powerful than content that came before. So the problem with that is that then older content will actually lose its shine and relevance as a collateral. So when it comes to the theory, yeah, all relics offer 3 skills, but really only one will offer both interesting gameplay and useful rewards, which is why it's not actually surprising that Excavator had an overwhelming choice of over 80%. Because the skills involving it were most recently updated, and the most recently updated skills will have the best rewards. This is not to say that there hasn't been an effort or that older skills get zero attention, but generally speaking they do get far less attention. And then we have the fire making issue, which, I mean, do I really need to get into it? Because I think that one is pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, the problem with skills being relevant and useful is more of an issue with the main game than it is with leagues, but this tier really ampliated something that has been very prevalent for the past few years. Issues aside, however, I can't really lie and say I didn't have fun using this relic, and again, that's because of the skills it involves. On top of getting the best rewards, they also tend to get the most modern gameplay loops, and interestingly, the mining loop is actually far more simple than many methods that exist in old school RuneScape. This loop is simple but effective, and it employs a more dynamic reward system when it comes to awarding players XP, which I've explained in an older video that you can go watch if you want. Maybe I'll remember to actually link it below. Then we have smithing. Is smithing actually way slower than in old school RuneScape? Yes, 100%. Do I feel like upgrading armor isn't a worthwhile part of the skill? 100%. But yet again, the simple nature of just hammering away to smith something feels much more satisfactory than it is in old school RuneScape. In a weird twist of events, an action taking longer to yield an item feels better to engage with as a player. The levels are far more straightforward as well, so if you have access to rune items, you actually have access to every rune item, and the level retiering was a really nice touch. On top of all of that, both of these skills have level related rewards that make the skill better to engage with. Sure, you can smith rune items at level 50, but things like crafting items at full hit, or creating extra bars, or just being able to eat up an item faster are exactly the type of reward progression that the skill reward is actually opened up with the rework. One that honestly I became a huge fan of. And lastly, archaeology. I could talk about how complete the skill feels, how it incorporates a simple gathering gameplay loop into an immersive lore device, or how the mysteries are very fun to, pardon the pun, dig into. Hell, I could even talk about the longevity the skill has, with being able to simply open more dig sites for you to explore, fits right with the skill, and offers new rewards without having to reinvent itself. But honestly, I don't feel like I need to. I feel this skill pretty much just speaks for itself, and it's the reason as to why a lot of people consider it the best skill in the game. All in all, regardless of the balancing issues, I do think that leagues tend to have this, shall we say, hidden benefit to the main game. It allows us to realize problems that we might not have seen before, that is if you haven't been paying attention. But the point is, I have harped on this before, and I will continue to do so, but leagues have hopefully made people much more aware that these are indeed issues that happen in the main game, and that we should probably do something about them. And I will actually explain some of these a little bit later on. But speaking of other issues, let's talk about the next one. When we arrived to the second tier of relics, we ran into yet another issue. But first, let's discuss the relics to see where the issue lies. This tier, much mirroring the old school RuneScape game mode, is all about support skills. Yet again, is a tier that will be overpowered to the skill in question, but not much outside of that. Here we have 3 skills being offered, being agility, thieving and farming. For the most part, these relics have as an objective to enhance your support skills, although contrary to tier 1, here things have different effects that depend on each skill. All I have to say on this is that they sounded pretty fun, regardless if it was the insta growth from farming, the boots from agility, or the guaranteed thieving check. I honestly don't think you could have really gone wrong here. Ironically, I do think that the choice here was less important than in the first tier, although this little lull period isn't that big of a deal because it can be overcome quite quickly. The less impactful nature also made it somewhat unbalanced state, but not be that much of a thing. But with all of that being said, I do think more skills could have been added here, and I do believe there was plenty of room for other skills to be involved in relics just in general, since there were skills that simply weren't affected by relics unless you needed other skills to do that skill. For instance, the engineering requires combat, so I guess, it is affected by relics that are affected by combat, but no relic affected the engineering directly, and I do feel that some of these skills as a result were a missed opportunity. Another one, for example, was summoning. That is, however, not a problem I want to highlight here. Instead, my issue comes from how boring this tier was. And you might be thinking, wait, hold on, boring? Yeah, boring. You see, generally speaking, with tiers like these, you can go a bit wilder because they have less effect on the game. So in the last league, the thieving relic allowed you to steal in a 11 by 11 square radius thing. Was this overpowered? Absolutely. Was it way more OP than it sounded? No, not really, but it did something that was actually really cool. It gave us an ability we simply don't have in the main game. And that's something I very much enjoy during leagues, the ability to do things you can do in the main game. And that is why I found this tier boring. Like, don't get me wrong, the relics were fine and I, really enjoy them. But I can do most of these things in the main game. For instance, take the insta growth perk from the farming relic. It might sound like this super OP thing from leagues, but you do have insta growth potions in the main game that allow you to do the same thing. Sure, to a more limited degree, but you still have that. The thieving relic, being able to note all of the things that you pickpocket, guess what? The main game also has this, and it's the thieving cape perk. And agility boots that provide XP? Oh boy, let me tell you about Silver Rock boots, which pretty much just made agility in the main game literally 0 time, as in you can get 200 million agility XP without pretty much touching agility. And that's the thing, while the relics were definitely fine, ultimately none of it felt like it was a thing that I, was experiencing for the first time. They still did enhance the skills they were about, but didn't offer anything that was terribly exciting, like again, for example, the old school leagues of being able to thieve in a 11 by 11 radius. And that is actually a theme with most tiers of relics, although some of them you do feel it more than others. However, despite that, there is one thing that actually impressed me quite a lot. The third tier was all about the teleporting relics, yet again a staple of the old school RuneScape game mode. While I was complaining earlier about the lack of balancing, here it's actually the opposite. This tier is way too balanced, like how am I supposed to know what do I need to pick? The quick rundown is, you have a relic that teleports to Slayer relevant things, a relic teleports to Fairy and Farming relevant things, and a relic that teleports to Jewelry relevant things. This tier actually wasn't as crucial because RuneScape 3 actually does have a wealth of teleports, so you really couldn't go wrong with any. Personally, I went with the school because it was one that I hadn't taken in a league before, because I think it was kind of exclusive to RuneScape 3 here. The other two, I had already picked them in old school RuneScape. The thing is, that's not what I'm surprised by. What I'm surprised by was actually something that I really, and I mean really, was not expecting. The polish. What do I mean by the polish? I mean the level of polish the league has. Look, if you come from RuneScape 3, you know that every update is the equivalent of playing roulette. Will these week's update just completely break? Will it break something completely unrelated? Will your chat display be fucked because they made nerfs to combat? Who knows? It truly is a mystery. Which is why in 3 weeks of leagues, I barely run into any bugs. Now, don't get me wrong, they do exist. In fact, I've used a couple of bugs to, especially back tasks, such as, killing monsters when I'm not in the area that I'm supposed to be, or, doing things that I don't have the level for. But as a whole, that's actually super minor stuff. Like, I was expecting what usually happens in old school RuneScape, which is, at the start of the league to be delayed by a couple of hours because the servers are burning, or for players using certain login methods to not be able to log in at all. Instead, what I got was just a nice, smooth experience. Even with the minor bugs that exist, none of them really broke my experience in any way that, was massive or impeded me from playing the game. This is a level of polish that, given the game mode, I was 100% not expecting. But it's a level of polish I didn't even realize was there because of how polished the experience actually was. It was an incredibly smooth experience. Only after the second week did I think, wait, I didn't really encounter like that many bugs, especially none that were like a super big inconvenience for me, and honestly that is something that if you play RuneScape 3, you won't be able to say very often. Look, I love criticizing RuneScape 3, but when praise is warranted, I'll also be the one to be there to give it, and this has been the most polished League's experience I have had. Hats off to the developers, because here they have done an amazing job. And honestly, fuck it, since we're already on the wagon, the league as a whole has been incredibly fun. Despite all of the little problems that it has, and despite me, being highly critical of everything related to RuneScape 3, despite all of the flaws that is present both in the main game or in the leagues, this league has honestly just showcased how fun RuneScape 3 can be, and it has been great to relive the early game experience with other players, something I haven't been able to do in ages due to mostly me consistently missing new game modes, but it has been so nice to see especially Lumbridge light up with players. And even at this point in the league, yeah sure, you don't really have that many players there anymore, but you still see the people still coming into the league and trying it out, and the low levels giving it a shot. That is something that we missed for a very, very long time. There is, however, one minor thing that did, pardon the pun again, bug me. Me and a bunch of other people. The quests. Yeah, look, I'm not gonna blame the devs on this one. The truth is, old school RuneScape never had to deal with this before. Either every league has had region lock, meaning they have to automatically unlock quests, otherwise you can just be in the region or do a bunch of content in the region, or the single league that didn't have region lock had a theme where you could unlock skills and you could unlock / skip quest lines. So yeah, I'm not gonna be like too harsh on them. Obviously the solution here is obvious, just autocomplete quests from things you unlock. One of the issues I constantly actually ran into was the fact that I had rewards from certain quests, and yet the quest line or the quest itself was locked. For the future, the best way to tackle this is to just get a reward from a quest, just autocomplete related quests. Let me give you an example. One of the passive tiers unlocks is Ancient Curses, the prayer book, with like soul split and stuff. yet the quests related to it don't auto-unlock, meaning you have the reward of a quest, but not the quest itself. Like, it would be better if you just, got the quest completion as soon as you got the reward from it. However, that's not even the biggest issue with quests. Aside the fact that RuneScape 3 has a shit ton of quests, in RuneScape 3 the way you mostly progress your account is through quests, while old school RuneScape is a bit more open about the entire game and you building your account through different things in the game, including quests, but not only. In RuneScape 3 most of the rewards are indeed locked behind quests, which for the main game this is not a bad design, although I would love it to be a bit more open like old school RuneScape, but when you do have a limited game mode, yeah, not to mention some quests are super old and interacting with them is just kinda junky. I mean, every time I have to do Legends quest is an absolute nightmare on RuneScape 3. So yeah, it's not like doing certain quests is an amazing experience, especially when you have to redo so many of them. But actually, speaking of quests being one of the main ways to build your account, Tier 4 was a choice between a Clue Relic, which again, a staple of old school RuneScape, and Production Master, a relic somewhat lifted again from old school RuneScape. Look, I don't mind them doing this, if someone else did it well, you don't really need to try and reinvent the wheel. You also add Rejuvenated, but due to how weak the previous relics were, this honestly was a bit of a wasted spot, especially because usually in this tier you have a Slayer relic, so I would have loved to see a Slayer relic here. Now, while both the Clue relic, which makes clue drops more frequent as well as giving you more rewards and allowing to like skip clues, teleport and so on because of the Globetrotter outfit, and the Production relic, which converted entire inventories into one action and it just gave you a gazillion of XP due to infinite urns, those were good choices. But ultimately at this point there was a certain problem that started showing up: the lack of skilling content in the game. Now again, this isn't an issue with leagues necessarily, but one that leagues reflected quite a bit. So let me take you from the top in order for you to understand the full picture here. At this point relics start requiring quite a bit of points to reach. Not many, but a few. Most tasks surprisingly had a lot of skilling content in them, which I actually do enjoy since I do prefer skilling to PVM. A lull, however, is sort of created at this point in the league where you need more points to reach later relics, but there isn't a lot of skilling content in the game, so most skilling tasks are related to requiring levels in order to complete. You don't want to train the skills yet because you are missing on half of the potential XP you could get, and that is where the lull comes from. In reality, yes, there's plenty of tasks to do, plenty of skilling tasks to do, but when you combine the lack of skilling methods in the main game with a lack of sufficient multipliers, it makes people feel like playing is somewhat wasting their time because they're not getting the full XP, but at the same time they need to train their skills in order to actually do the tasks relating to them. So let me break down a little bit further. Earlier I talked about quests being the main way to build your account. The issue with quests is that they have a level requirement, so what happens when you mix quests being your main way to build your account, them requiring skill levels to be completed, and a game that is mostly focused on PVM? Exactly, most people will want to skip the skilling, and that's what has been happening in RuneScape 3 for a very long time. This is actually somewhat of a multifaceted issue, but to boil things down here and generalize a bit, since most of the game is PVM players, that's the content they will want, and since those players want to do PVM, anything that, well, just isn't PVM is kinda bad. This is why RuneScape 3 has a mentality of skipping skills. I'm not gonna get super into it, but if you want to understand why creating incentives to skip skilling content is bad, you can watch my video about protein items, which, spoiler, when I say protein items I actually mean most protein items, FOMO stuff, daily escape, holiday events, you name it, basically anything that gives players XP as a trade-off instead of just giving them new methods. In case you haven't watched it, the gist of it is that, well, again, skipping skills essentially just leads you to have little incentive to create methods for them, which in return is why leagues actually kind of feel somewhat empty in the skilling department, despite the amount of skilling tasks to do. So let me give you a very quick example. The main game at some point introduced Silver Rock boots. I've already talked about them in this video. These are boots you charge with Silver Rock feathers, which when engaging with a skilling activity will consume a feather and give you agility XP. If my interest is in, getting levels so I can, get the skills out of the way, that's what I'm using. Problem is, let's say you are a skiller, and obviously you want to do agility because, hey, it's fun to train agility, like for example doing Allowed Sepulchre, which is a very good way to train agility. I mean, sure, you could ask the devs to have more agility methods, but why would other players want to? It's just better to use Silver Rock feathers. There is no reason to use anything else or as a result have any other method. And that's the reason as to why in the same time frame Old School RuneScape got a bunch of agility related updates, especially major ones, and honestly a couple more since, RuneScape 3 got barely anything. Obviously I don't need to tell you that not investing into skills doesn't solve any issues, but that's the current predicament that RuneScape 3 is in. Although I'm not being entirely fair. While yes, the lack of skilling does affect leagues and well the main game, we do have proof that when given control, the devs are pretty good at their job. Since we're already on the agility theme, take an Acrony agility course. I love it, and it's one of my favorite agility methods between both games. It serves as a agility course, but also it serves as shortcuts to move around the island, it serves as a reward space to get something related to agility and movement in the game, and it's a nice tie to the current EOC movement abilities, which is how most people move around in the game. It's overall amazing and it strikes all of the points it needs and more. Sticking with Anachronia, we also have another. We have Big Game Enter, which is honestly why I'm maxed in RuneScape 3 and not in Old School RuneScape. I just don't vibe with Old School RuneScape Enter. But this Big Game Enter is honestly fucking amazing, dude. So yeah, I do wish we would have far more skilling updates like those in RuneScape 3. Skilling updates that do contribute to the current skills instead of just adding to the top half. Because as we could see in leagues, when most of your skilling tasks rely on having levels instead of doing activities because there aren't enough activities because you've neglected them for so long in favor of just skipping the levels, players don't want to grind the stats yet because the multiplier isn't there yet. It can create a pretty big lull in the league, which you don't want. On the tier 5 we have the combat relics, which are all fine, I guess. They were kind of boring, mostly just increasing damage, reducing ability cooldown and having one minor touch such as magic, not spending runes, melee giving you one square buffer to hit enemies, ranged attacks all acting like a chinchompa, and the Necro one. It was a bit of a shame that in a game where you mostly do PvM, the combat relic choice wasn't that deep. Especially considering that RuneScape 3, you do have far more incentive to use only one combat style due to how deep the combat runs and how hard it is to branch off and master other combat styles. Overall it was a bit of a letdown, but at the same time, I mean, it was the safest play, so why make something that can break the game when you can just increase numbers the players do? And well, it functions well enough, so I can't really blame the devs on this one. This lack of excitement did feel a little bit bad, however, instead of dwelling on it for too long, I want to focus on something more exciting. The passive rewards. This was something they learned from Old School RuneScape, to make some rewards just passive so everyone has access to them. And oh boy, sometimes the passive rewards were actually more powerful than whatever relic you picked, and that's where the interesting thing lies. So, you know how I've talked about questing being important to build your account and about how PvMers want to skip skills to get access to quests because of the rewards? Well, it's because the rewards are pretty much a must for PvM. I mean, at tier 5, the passive reward was Ancient Curses Unlocked, the thing with Soul Split, which is just a massive upgrade for PvM, and definitely feels more exciting than whatever combat relic they actually gave you. It's not like the passive rewards came without flaws. I did find the access to certain boss fights a bit weird. Again, this comes from the questing issue I talked about earlier. If instead of, being given a random boss fight, I was actually just, got given the quest line associated with it, and it got auto-completed, so I could just fight it, I would honestly feel better, but yeah, outside of that, I did enjoy how many massive upgrades essentially these passive tiers actually had. In a way, I think it was a good play. Look, instead of locking curses, for example, behind a specific tier or forcing the people that didn't pick that tier to do the quests for them, everyone just has access to them. It is curious that in a game based around PvM, the most exciting PvM unlocks would be the ones you actually get passively. All the big upgrade from curses to the spellbooks to the PvM buffs and even Slayer focused buffs. RuneScape 3 devs know their audience and they knew that delivering PvM related access to every single player regardless of the relic they picked was actually a must in a game that, well, is filled with that type of content. To close this part, it needs to be said, however, I do feel that the XP multiplier could have been a bit better distributed. It did feel bad to unlock a new tier and have no XP boost and no other number boost of any kind. This works in old school RuneScape because they intertwine XP boost with minigame point boost, which unfortunately here we're actually missing, and honestly I kinda do miss them. Tier 6 had 2 relics. Well, okay, 1 relic, sorry, but no one's picking Banker's Note. And that is because this tier might be the most unbalanced tier in the entire league. And ironically, that's an issue. While Perfectionist is an amazing relic, it does suffer from a little problem I like to call, yes, there is fun to be lost when you are too overpowered. In case you are unaware, the relic combines the power of Alchemy with Invention, which I love. As far as theming goes, this is actually really great. So whenever you walk something, you also get the disassembling benefits, but if you disassemble something, you also get the alchemy benefits, and items are also saved 66% of the time. This is a super fun relic. If it weren't for a tiny little line of text that says access to infinite invention materials. This straight up ruins the relic. How come? Well, while the league is supposed to give you overpowered relics for you to have fun, the point of them being overpowered is that they are more fun to engage with. The problem with this is that it removes half of the skill that is Invention. So instead of Invention becoming more fun to engage with, you end up not having to engage with half of it, while the other half becomes kind of meaningless. I get that a lot of PvM players didn't want to maybe get stuck getting perks for Invention, because perks are also needed for PvM, but skipping the entire thing just doesn't feel very good. This actually leads to an even bigger problem, the lack of synergy between relics, which leads to a lack of strategy. So let's pick the Clue relic for example. Imagine if you could use it to obtain easier materials for Invention, right? The relic would have synergy between each other because would, help each other. So the Clue relic you would easily get items, and then because of the assembling relic you would easily get components and alchemy items, because Clue scroll items tend to give a lot of rune stuff to alch as well. So perfect synergy, right? It would actually make leagues more fun because you actually did have some thought put into it. It would still be incredibly overpowered, but there's some thought put into it. When something is overpowered, the fun isn't about something becoming arbitrary, but rather how far you can push it, and here you don't really push it very far. In fact, you don't push it at all. You're already at the finish line at this point, which makes most overpowered relic in the league the most boring in a way. But okay, how do we then fix this? How do we fix this problem? Well, actually there's a few easy ways to do it. First up, just remove the infinite components with a perk that simply gives you more components. You already keep 66% of the items you disassemble anyway. You could also go the route of dividing both Invention and Alchemy relics. This way you could choose if you wanted free Invention or if you wanted free GP, which would lead to free Invention anyway, and vice versa, just slower. Those are my go-to fixes to this relic. Personally, I would prefer the first one, but at the same time, what other relic would you even go for then? Do you make this relic a passive and then have people actually choose between unlocking a combat related thing or a skilling related thing to aid this relic? Certainly there's a lot of solutions. My main point here is that you have an awesome relic, especially as theming goes, but it ends up being so overpowered it kind of loses part of the excitement and it ends up kind of undermining Banker's Note anyway, which in my opinion is also a really goated relic. And I mean, since I'm already doing minor complaints, let's add some more. I disliked tasks involving dailies, hourlies, weeklies, whatever time-gated things. RuneScape 3 is filled with them, and while most didn't have tasks, some did, and honestly, I just hate time-gated content, so I gotta hate on it every time it shows up. I would have loved if the Thieving Relic actually allowed you to gain herb/farming XP through pickpocketing seeds. It's exactly the type of wacky, overpowered stuff I would love to see in leagues, especially one coupled with the drop cleaners like Herbicide or Seedicide also affecting your pickpocketing. Globetrotter outfit being infinite was pretty cool. I just wish I could actually swap puzzle clues because oh my lord, I did hate doing knots. This is something they did in old school RuneScape where they standardized clues to have caskets only when it's a reward and to have the puzzle box be a separate item from the clue itself. This type of consistency isn't present in RuneScape 3. Fairy rings being unlocked without the quest kinda devalued whoever picked that relic. Not major since the quest isn't super hard to do, but still it is a minor nitpick. It was hard to actually know what other tiers players were at since the trophy icons kinda looked the same or at least looked very confusing at some points and I could not discern if they were like Dragon, Mithril, Rune or whatever the hell they were. I would also love to see less tasks involving quests, but I've already gone through the quest problem. And yet again, the lack of minigame multipliers. I would have loved that for example, RuneSpan and stuff. I understand that points work vastly different when it comes to quantities, but again, a multiplier of any kind would have been amazing, even if it's not consistent. This was another tier that was very balanced and a very exciting tier. You had a relic which made the game go into old school RuneScape but EOC, one you would just morph all damage into one single item, and one where you would just, I bet there was a lot of people having fun with their EOFs, I really do. Overall, I actually love this tier and I think the relic here did fit the game quite well, and honestly the relics were super exciting. Considering, the fact that we didn't have a lot of PVM relics, so I was really glad that this tier was very focused on that. However, do you know what wasn't exciting? The community. I have flamed the RuneScape 3's community quite a lot, and allow me to do it once more. You see, we can sit here and point the fingers at lazy, incompetent devs that don't know a thing about game design, despite sometimes them doing the best updates into the game that people love, but we just seem to forget about those every time. But the reality is, the devs tend to do what the community wants. So if, the game has bad things, you can't just throw all of the blame at the devs. This is a point I have made in the past when it comes to the over-focus on FOMO stuff, the focus on PVM and the lack of skilling and so on. But to us, what's relevant is more the efficiency brain rot the community has. I saw plenty of people saying that picking Everlasting Faith was bad because, well, if you do more damage, you take less damage so you don't need defensive capabilities anyway. I absolutely fucking disagree, for multiple reasons. Not only does this mentality ignore, casual players' wishes, since, not everyone's only interest in this game is to just do bossing or PVM, but it also forgets an obvious problem. People suck quite a lot before they become good. The only way to do more damage, or the only way that doing more damage helps you avoid damage, is when you already know what you are doing, which oftentimes means people who are good at something kind of really forget how hard that stuff was when you weren't good at said thing. Therefore, ignoring an entire relic and saying it's a bait pick because you no longer suck at PVM is forgetting about casual players. And that's the thing, maybe this relic wasn't there for you, and that's okay. It doesn't mean it's bad, or it doesn't mean that the relic is a wasted spot or whatever. It also doesn't mean that players are gonna regret or whatever bunch of other things people were talking about. It is something that happens so often with RuneScape 3 players. The idea that doing things a certain way means you are playing the game wrong, and that doing things a certain way loses you time, and losing time is bad because if you are losing time, you're just not doing the good content in the game or whatever, but you are fucking losing time playing a video game. the video game itself is you losing time. Look, I know at this point I'm sounding a little bit bitter, but it does get to a point where this type of behavior just really gets annoying, like it really gets on your nerves. No, I don't give two shits if doing Atlas Arrows to 99 fletching is bad because I could have made so much more money PVMing. I didn't want to do PVM, I wanted to do Atlas Arrows, so that's what I fucking did. Who gives a fuck if I lost time? You know, like the complete disrespect for the casual player or players that have unorthodox ways of playing the game by the RuneScape 3 community is why the game is in the state that it is. Look, we can sit here and point to 100 things Jagex has done wrong, and there have been many, from MTX surveys that have gone nowhere to promises that were never fulfilled, to content that was talked about and then shelved and then unshelved and then shelved again and never talked about again. But from a casual player perspective, not only is Jagex not doing a good job keeping me around the game, neither is the community, quite frankly. If I didn't have a special interest in trying to understand what systems work, I would have fucked off permanently to old school RuneScape a long time ago. So maybe let's chill out with the advice that oftentimes is more biased than asking a construction company if the highway really needs another lane, because a lot of it just comes off as really condescending and diminishing, and it undervalues the experience casual players want to have with the game. And when I say casual players, I mean every unorthodox player that isn't efficiency player brain. And honestly, having a game filled with veterans is one-way ticket to your game stagnating and slowly dying. It's fine for casual players to struggle, it's fine for players to want to engage with the game differently than you. They are wasting their time, sure, but so are you. You're both playing a video game, and ultimately, who is really wasting their time? The person doing something inefficient and having fun, or someone not wasting any bit of XP but playing the game like it's their full-time job with all of the stresses included? I'm not even saying people can't find fun in being efficient, I'm just saying that if it isn't their style and it's not gonna be everyone's style, why the fuck are we even just almost shaming casual players because, oh well, you're just not good enough at the game because you are new? Like, a lot of RuneScape 3 players just force themselves to like this type of mentality because that's what the community does, that's how the community operates. I have met plenty of RuneScape 3 players that think very efficiently about the game, not because they enjoy it, but because that's how all of their RuneScape 3 friends operate. Honestly, I might make a full video on these issues someday, but I'm going to leave it here now. My main point is, let people choose OP relics that fit their playstyle better. Casual players deserve fun. To close out this video, we need to then answer the question, was the league a success or a failure? While it is early to call the shots, I would say it was a resounding success. The game was able to attract old school RuneScape players and long veterans who hadn't played the game in ages and showcase all of the improvements that have been made over the years. It's doing wonders for the image that RuneScape 3 has, which, was very much fucking needed. And the thing is, even by RuneScape 3 standards, this was a massive success. I cannot tell you the last time a game mode was fun and didn't have any strings attached. Usually RuneScape 3 temporary game modes either suffer from boring gameplay, cash grab attempts, FOMO rewards you won't ever be able to get anyway, and they are usually just a one and done thing. Instead, we got an incredibly fun game mode that is laying the foundation for the future, that honestly is lifting the joy that RuneScape 3 players have, while showcasing that the game can indeed be really fun. Obviously, a lot of what I said in this video, and especially a lot of the critique, has to be said within the context that this is the first league for RuneScape 3. So while yes, I complained about relic tiers being unbalanced, about relics being boring, or just overall a bunch of other issues like quests, this was meant to lay the foundation for future leagues. And within that context, I really cannot fault the devs for not being perfect and choosing a more boring, but quite frankly, safer route for a lot of the decisions they took. All in all, I am excited for the future, even if I am still playing these leagues. I cannot wait for what they are going to do, and I really do hope that Jagex doesn't pull the whole, yeah, this game mode was fun and players enjoyed it, we're never gonna bring it up again. So I really hope they stick to it. The foundation is here, the league was incredibly polished, I'm still playing it, I'm gonna keep playing it, even if not as much as I would have loved to, and I really do hope they stick with it in the future. So by that standard, I would say it was a massive success.